I really want to thank the MaD organizers for making it possible for me to be here today and meet all of you. And I also want to thank Mrs. Adams, Ms. Frisbee, Mrs. Ross, Mrs. Franti, Mrs. DeVault, and Mrs. Settlemeyer. Who are these people, you may ask? Well, they're my 6th grade, 5th grade, 4th grade, 3rd grade, 2nd grade, and 1st grade elementary school teachers. And even after all of these years, their names and their faces come to my mind quickly and fill me with a sense of warmth and gratitude. I think that the older I get, actually the more I look up to them. Because even though I don't remember everything that they taught me or what grade I got in their class, the way that they made me feel stays with me. And that's such a tremendous power of a teacher. How many people will remember us after we're gone? But a teacher has years and years, hundreds and hundreds of students that will remember them possibly for the rest of their life, for better or worse. And child development theories and studies underscore the importance of experiences during the elementary school years in building up or inhibiting a person's self-confidence, efficacy, values, and motivation to learn. So because I myself have experienced and valued my own elementary school education, I care about it so much, and that's why I focus on it in my work, and that's why I do what I do. But I'm from California, so why am I now working in China on elementary school education? Well, I didn't start out doing that. I was an economics and international relations major in college, and I was drawn to go to China and study abroad because I was interested in learning about this global superpower and investigating its impact on the world through its economy and through international relations. But one day in Beijing changed all of that for me. I went with my classmates to an acrobatics performance. And during the show, I took a break and I went to the restroom. And there I met a woman whose job it was to hand out paper towels. So by that time, I learned that one of the most interesting ways to learn about China and the ways where I would gain most insight was not necessarily from my professors or from reading the textbooks, but from talking to ordinary people in everyday life. So after I thanked her for the paper towel, I struck up a conversation and I asked her where she was from. And it turned out that 4 years ago, she and her husband had moved from a province in central China to Beijing to make a better income for themselves. And the work was hard, and they lived in very dismal conditions. But what worried her and hurt her the most was the fact that she had to leave behind a young son in the village who was now living with his grandparents and whom she hadn't seen in a long time. So since the Chinese New Year was coming up, I asked her if she was planning to return home to reunite with her son, and she said that she couldn't because she couldn't afford the train fare and she was afraid of losing her job. So her story was so interesting, I forgot the rest of the show, and I couldn't get her situation or her son out of my mind. Who were these children who were growing up without their parents in the countryside? What kind of education were they receiving? After I returned to California, I decided I wanted to investigate this question further. And so I applied for a fellowship to return to China for a year and do firsthand field work. I traveled to a lot of rural areas, and I realized that rural areas and urban areas were struggling with a lot of problems. So the inequalities between urban and rural areas were very stark. They came out in terms of income inequalities, as well as access to social services like education and healthcare, as well as avenues to correct injustices. And I would have thought that education, getting more rural children educated, would help to solve some of those problems, would be working to improve conditions in rural areas. But what I found as I traveled to schools and talked to parents and teachers and principals and students was that in fact, children in school had very little time to learn about the problems in their communities. They were in school sometimes for 10 hours a day, unable to leave the school grounds. Their curriculum was standardized and very much centered on urban culture and urban priorities. So sometimes the examples or the questions in their textbooks or on the exams would be about urban culture that they had very little direct familiarity with. In addition, popular culture and mainstream values were preaching that an urban lifestyle was much more desirable than a rural lifestyle. And so there was very little incentive or interest on the part of students to look around them and find out what was unique, interesting, or valuable about their own hometowns, about their villages. And finally, the education system was very test-centered. So there was only one metric by which most students and teachers were judged. And this also left very little room for further exploration beyond the textbook. So I started to question whether this kind of education was really actually serving rural development or rural communities. If education was mostly helping a few of the students to advance through the system on the basis of high test scores, what about the other students? They were left behind, perhaps to drop out of school or not be able to continue on past junior high. And were they prepared for the real world? Often not. They had spent 9 years in school, studying from the textbook and passing tests, but not really learning skills that were going to help them now that they had to find a job. And secondly, they also didn't know very much about their hometown, and those who did manage to go to college or get a good job in the city had very little reason to feel like they would ever want to go back to their hometown or do anything to help improve its conditions. So in addition, throughout this year of fieldwork, I learned that the Chinese government and a lot of NGOs have been doing a wonderful job in improving the conditions, the hardware conditions of education, building schools, giving scholarships, and increasing access. But the question about quality of education and keeping students in school was still a big challenge. And you can see that despite different policy improvements, dropout rates were actually not necessarily falling. So together with two friends who were also doing investigation into these issues, I co-founded an organization called the Rural China Education Foundation, RCEF. And we made our mission to provide or promote education for students that prepares them to improve their own lives and communities. And how did we do this? Well, first we started to go to villages ourselves and put on summer camps to try to enrich the quality and the diversity of education that students received. But we knew that that was not enough. We were just outsiders coming for a short period of time. So we were always on the lookout for teachers local teachers who also shared these educational values and aspirations. And eventually, through a lot of patience and going out to talk to many teachers, we did fortunately come to know a few very talented individuals who then invited us to their school to work full-time with them and partner with them in experimenting with new types of rural education. So I just want to tell you about one example, Sun Lao Shi. She is a native of Yongji County in Shanxi Province, and she graduated high school but was not able to go on to college. While she was in high school, her teacher hit her, and this caused her so much pain that she really wasn't motivated to study anymore. And she had very few choices after graduation, but she ended up going to become a substitute 代课老师 or substitute freelance teacher, and has been doing that for the last 20 years. But in the process, when her own daughter started first grade, and she saw that her daughter was falling behind in school, and could tell that a vicious cycle would start where her daughter would have poor grades and then be ignored or punished by the teacher and probably do worse, she decided to take matters into her own hands, and she started her own elementary school. in her home village. And she recruited a team of other freelance 代课老师 from the local area, and together they provided an education that was more well-rounded than what the other public schools in the area were doing. They had music class, they had physical education on a regular basis, and she led them out on field trips around the school and didn't keep them cooped up. This is Wang Laoshi, one of the teachers on her team. She started out as a teacher, but then went to a city near Beijing to open her own restaurant as a migrant worker. And she was making a good living, but when she would call home, she'd hear that her young son was acting up in school and misbehaving, and that his grandparents couldn't control him. So she knew, because she had been a teacher before, what that meant, and decided to close down her restaurant work and come back to her hometown to be with her son and play a big role in raising him. And fortunately, she was also hired as a teacher at this school and became a very effective reading teacher who helped us to set up a library and start extracurricular reading classes in the school. In addition, the RCEF staff who were based in this school helps the teachers to think about ways to engage students in learning by using the resources in their immediate environment. So not only would the students be learning the knowledge and the skills that the regular curriculum wanted them to be learning, but they would also see its application to the real world and have fun while doing it. So I want to show you a video, a quick video that is a case of this.